His Majesty King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, by common consent, the wisest and the shrewdest of all the 48 sons of King Abdulaziz, the founder of the kingdom. King Faisal, a desert warrior at 13, is now in his early 60s. He prays 5 times a day, and he lives strictly according to the Muslim code. He doesn't drink or smoke, and he lives modestly. Whereas his brother, ex-King Saud, whom he deposed in 1964, is alleged to have had more than 360 wives and concubines, King Faisal has only one wife. He was convinced that economic chaos and an Egyptian-inspired coup would be almost inevitable if King Saud was allowed to continue his reckless rule. King Saud, Faisal thought, was playing right into Nasser's hands. Faisal was convinced that the only way to keep Nasser at bay was to implement a crash program of economic and social reform. On the surface, there is no doubt that King Faisal is making great progress. One difficulty is the sheer size of his desert kingdom. It's spread over an area roughly 10 times the size of Britain, but its population is less than half of London's. The fantastic pace at which new modern roads are eating into the desert has earned Saudi Arabia the title of the fastest developing country in the world. Unlike most developing countries, Saudi Arabia, because of her vast oil wealth, is not short of money. But the rate at which it's being poured out to finance new roads is so great that the king's accountants have difficulty in keeping up to date with the cost of it all. In 1957, the total budget for the development of all forms of communications was £9 million. Last year, nearly 70 million was spent on development projects, most of them roads. The boom in Saudi Arabia's economy is suitably reflected in the glow of the government's administrative headquarters in Riyadh. The ministry buildings are elegant and expensive. From them, the orders go out for the spending of more millions on social welfare schemes, on the development of trade and industry, and on defence. Saudi Arabia recently concluded a £100 million defence deal with Britain, which includes the supply of 40 Lightning fighters. These pictures of a vampire graveyard at Jeddah airport help to illustrate just how badly Saudi Arabia needs a new defence system. These vampires, brought several years ago from Britain, have remained rotting and rooted to the spot where they were left by the British pilots who delivered them. No Saudi pilots have been capable of flying them. As the guardian of the holy places of Islam, for which Mecca, the holy city forbidden to all but Muslims, is the spiritual capital, Saudi Arabia is spending more than £50 million on enlarging the 2 great mosques. The religion's holiest shrine is the Kaaba, the cubical building to which Muslims throughout the world turn when they prostrate themselves in prayer. Ironically, Islam's holy book, the Quran, is the source of the greatest obstacle to social revolution. For the Quran is the basis of Saudi Arabia's constitutional laws as well as its religion. By their insistence on the strictest interpretation of the Quranic laws, the country's religious leaders have succeeded in the past in shackling material progress. The need for a new interpretation of the Quran is demonstrated by Saudi Arabia's methods, based mostly on the Quran, of punishing crime.
The application of Saudi justice is based on 2 main principles. There is a specific punishment for every crime, and every punishment, including executions, are carried out in public. And by Western standards, some of the punishments for some of the crimes seem little less than barbaric. On this beach in Jeddah this morning, I witnessed a thief having his hand chopped off. This is the specified punishment for stealing. While the royal proclamation was read and while the ritual itself was carried out, our cameras were temporarily confiscated. By the time they were returned to us, most of the crowd of thousands who turned out to watch had dispersed. Those still on the scene were waiting to catch a glimpse of the spot where the mutilated hand was burned in a fire. Adultery is punished by death. Female adulterers are stoned to death. Male adulterers are thrown from the top of the highest building. Murder is punished by death, and the common practice is still for the guilty party to be beheaded. The last execution of that kind was in January this year.
The most prolific of all of Saudi Arabia's executioners is the man on the left. His name is Eid. Eid doesn't know how old he is, but he does know how many heads he's chopped off. It's a total of 108. The success of King Faisal's plans to spread reform throughout his country, 1 million square miles of desert, depends as much on the willingness of his people to accept changes as on the willingness of the religious leaders to agree to changes. A third of Saudi Arabia's estimated population of about 5 million is made up by nomads, tribesmen who still live much the same as they did in biblical times. The nomads and the tent-dwelling Bedouin do not want to be drawn into the 20th century. King Faisal, who is keenly aware that he must not go too fast for them, admits that he does not know the answer himself, but he is prepared to gamble because he must. But King Faisal's greatest gamble perhaps is in the towns, where the city slicker's status symbol is an American car. American not because they're better, cheaper or more reliable than their British and continental rivals, but American because they're the biggest and the showiest. They also have the loudest horns. The danger for King Faisal here is that by speeding the reforms he may hasten the revolution. The affluent city slickers, having tasted and liked some of the 20th century's virtues, may now want some of its vices. With rare exception, all Saudi women still wear black veils to mask their faces and ankle-length gowns that make them look like silhouettes cut out of black paper. The Quran has more to say on the position of women than any other social question, and the Quran clearly states that women are inferior to men. To husbands, the Quran offers this piece of advice on how to handle troublesome wives. As for those from whom you fear disobedience, the relevant passage says, admonish them and banish them to beds apart and beat them. The slow but gradual emancipation of Saudi women is said to have started in 1960, when the government took what was at the time a huge decision in allowing pictures of women to be published. Censorship of printed material is confined now mostly to news reports, and the targets for the censor's careless razor blade are invariably foreign reports about Saudi Arabia. Israel and President Nasser never make news either. We found the most remarkable proof of the pace of Saudi Arabia's social revolution behind these walls. This is the Dar el Hanan School for Girls in Jeddah. The name means House of Affection. These are almost certainly the first ever pictures taken in Saudi Arabia of young Saudi women unveiled. The fact that the headmistress and the girls, with the approval of their parents, had allowed us to take this film of them was at first disbelieved by some astonished government officials. Some people expressed fears that there would be big trouble, perhaps even a riot, if word of what we'd done reached the ears of the religious leaders and some of the less enlightened parents. The opening of the first girls' school in Saudi Arabia had to be postponed for 2 years because of opposition to it. Then, when it was opened 5 years ago, the government had to send in troops and police to keep it open. Protesting parents wrecked the school and beat up teachers. At another girls' school in Saudi Arabia today, the only man at the school is a priest, and he's allowed in only because he's blind. After we'd filmed some of the girls, I was allowed to talk to 2 of them. Can I ask you, first of all, what do you want to do when you're qualified, when you leave the school perhaps and go to university?
I want to go to the university in any country I can go.
And what about you?
I'm going to America. I want to be a social worker.
When you're qualified, do you want to come back to